Bryce Young is now on track to become a future NFL MVP. I know. That's a statement that seemed impossible just a few months ago. From being undersized, labeled as a bust, and having the worst rookie season in NFL history, Bryce continues to defy the odds due to one single reason. But before we talk about that, let's go back to the beginning. Bryce Young was born in Wynnewood, Pennsylvania to Craig and Julie Young. Now, Bryce didn't have an ordinary childhood. His dad was a therapist, and his mom was a special education teacher. From his childhood, Bryce was taught to always make his mental health a priority, regardless of the circumstances. But this would be tested. Bryce would find his love for football early on, when he was able to catch a ball at just 4 months old. Then, the minute his dad saw it happen, he invested everything to see his son succeed. He packed his family's bags up and would move them to Pasadena, California to live with his dad temporarily while the Young family found a place to live. This sudden move wasn't only for Craig to be closer to his dad. Pasadena was also home to some of the best high school football programs in the country. You see, Craig's parents were divorced and he was also a former high school football player who believed he never got the best coaching and guidance. So every day he made it his mission to give Bryce the help he needed. When Bryce was just 7 years old, he hired Danny Hernandez, a private quarterback coach. Craig constantly pushed Bryce to be around players that were better than him so that he would continue to improve. By the time he was 12, Bryce had started raising some eyebrows. He impressed Coach Hernandez so much that he got him an opportunity to throw with NFL wide receivers. But Bryce had a problem. He was exhausted from constantly being involved in football. Talks about missed throws started to bleed into pickup basketball games between Craig and Bryce. Therefore, Bryce told his mom that he no longer liked hanging around his dad due to how high his expectations were. This hurt Craig deeply. After some time had passed, Craig decided to make a change. He wanted to find a balance between being a coach and being a father. Now, instead of screaming, "Why would you do that?" after a bad throw, he would now ask, "What did you see, Bryce?" This subtle mindset shift gave Bryce confidence in himself. He no longer had to fight for his parents' approval, and Bryce started to become more motivated by himself, not others. The bond between Craig and Bryce would become stronger than ever, and the hard work started to show off on the field. The name Bryce Young was starting to make national noise before he even took a snap of high school football. All this noise would allow Bryce to receive his first college offer from Cliff Kingsbury and Texas Tech at just 13 years old. This newfound fame was the result of Craig helping Bryce attend all of the camps and go to all of the practices, regardless of where in the country they were. Every college in the nation now had their eyes locked in on the kid from Pasadena, and due to being motivated by only himself, Bryce was able to stay locked in, only focus on what he could control, and putting in the reps day to day.
However I'm ranked or however people perceive me today, it could change tomorrow, so you just have to keep working.
This mental clarity allowed Bryce to take his play to another level. When Bryce stepped onto the field at Cathedral High, it was clear that he was a different player than most were used to. His ability to process the game was light years ahead of everyone else. Not only that, but he was incredibly fundamentally sound, and Bryce loved every bit of the challenge. By trusting his preparation, no moment seemed too big for him. Young would receive limited playing time at Cathedral High during his freshman season, but would become the starting quarterback for the Phantoms the next year, and would lead them to a 10-2 record, throwing for 3,431 yards and scoring 49 total touchdowns. But there was an issue. Craig felt the exposure Bryce was getting at Cathedral High wasn't enough to push him to the collegiate level. Therefore, after talking with Bryce, they decided to take a risk. Bryce would transfer to the top football program in the state, Mater Dei High School, and from the outside, it seemed like the task would be too big. Bryce had only 2 years of high school left to make a statement on college programs, but due to his preparation and being challenged from a young age, Bryce had the internal confidence that he would be up for the task. And well, it's safe to say that preparation paid off. His ability to slow the game down from his confidence lit the high school world on fire. In his junior and senior seasons, Bryce would throw for a combined 8,374 yards and scored 111 total touchdowns to only 12 interceptions. wins. He can make every throw on the field from his work ethic and his day-to-day actions. And with that, he was ranked as the best quarterback in the nation, and he had offers from almost every college, including his hometown, University of Southern California. But after receiving a request from offensive coordinator Steve Sarkisian to come check out Alabama, Bryce agreed. When Bryce and his family went to visit, his mother broke down crying. Not because she was upset, but because she had a realization. Alabama was the perfect place for Bryce. It was thousands of miles from California and away from the support system that had always been there for him. Bryce now had to figure things out on his own. Using Alabama's mental health resources, he was able to successfully make the transition over to living on his own. Declaring as a psychology major, Bryce knew that the real challenge existed outside of the classroom. He'd eventually have to fill the shoes of current starting senior quarterback Mac Jones. But more importantly, he'd have to carry the weight of what it means to be an Alabama quarterback. Alabama was in the midst of a dynasty where they had dominated college football for the better part of a decade, and now it would be Bryce's turn to carry the torch. But that torch for the time being was still in the possession of Mac Jones, as he was a really good quarterback at Alabama. Therefore, Bryce would only come into the game during blowouts. Young would eventually get his first collegiate touchdown, but the main headline that year was Alabama. They were national champions, and Mac Jones declared for the NFL draft. There were now massive shoes to fill, but there was one scary truth the college world forgot to realize about Bryce Young. He has the mental edge over everyone else. From growing up in an environment where mental health was encouraged, Bryce was able to stay focused on improving his game. It wasn't about winning individual awards, it was about showing up and doing the work.
A lot of that stems from me. It's a lot of stuff that I see and I know, but I can do a better job of communicating. A lot of other stuff that also we've talked about that I want to improve on and I'm working to get better on, but those are a few of the things.
It was through this work that gave Bryce the ability to process the game faster than everyone else. This made him an absolute nightmare for opposing defenses. During his first full season at Alabama, he lit the college football world on fire. He threw for 4,872 yards and scored 50 total touchdowns to only 7 interceptions. No matter what life threw at him, he was focused.
It's like the less than 2 minutes left in the game, he's inside his own 20 in LSU, and the camera pans to him on that final drive of regulation, and the kid's back there smiling.
Oh, yeah.
He's just back there enjoying himself like a psychopath.
Yeah.
But he's like,
even when the game was on the line, like it was in the 2021 Iron Bowl, it didn't faze him. Bryce had already been through that same situation a million times through practice and preparation, so in his head, there was nothing to worry about. Does that look like a man who lacks confidence in his own ability? Absolutely not. Bryce led them right down the field to win the game. He would take home the Heisman Trophy, and the expectations of his upcoming junior season were sky high. These expectations would become even higher when Alabama lost in the national championship. During the game, Bryce delivered one of the worst performances of his college career. Suddenly, all of the critics were asking, could Bryce really rebound from such a painful loss after an incredible season? Well, it wouldn't be easy, as only one player has ever been able to repeat as the Heisman. Not only that, but NIL was starting to make its way into the college landscape, and Alabama was losing talent left and right. Suddenly, everyone was asking the same question. Could Bryce really hold a weaker than average Alabama team together? At first, the answer to that question was yes. Alabama started the season 6-0, but the cracks in the former college football juggernaut were starting to show. They would end up losing close games to Tennessee and LSU, and suddenly, all of the attention was on Bryce. But once again, he was able to shut out all of the noise. He helped Alabama finish the year with a 10-2 record, including a bowl win against Kansas State, which included this ridiculous throw. He finished the year with 3,328 passing yards, 36 total touchdowns, and only 5 interceptions. It didn't matter what was going on around him, Bryce was only focused on his own actions and being the best teammate he could possibly be. He was looking like the slam dunk #1 overall pick in the upcoming NFL draft, especially to a team who needs a quarterback to change their fortunes around. Introducing the Carolina Panthers. Carolina had been in absolute chaos ever since franchise legend Cam Newton left, and the owner David Tepper was incredibly impatient. He wanted results now, and he was willing to do anything to achieve them. So he mortgaged Carolina's future to go out and get the #1 overall pick. And in Tepper's eyes, he now had the choice of a quarterback that would save his team from constant failure. It was either Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. Bryce and CJ grew up together in California and even attended a lot of the same camps back in high school. As the draft approached, the question loomed: Young or Stroud? Carolina drafted Bryce Young #1 overall, becoming the first Alabama player to ever have such a recognition, and there's a reason for that. To this point, Alabama quarterbacks have had a bad rep in the NFL. Their skills just never transferred over to the next level and became what is known as a draft bust. Not only that, the quarterbacks selected #1 have a low probability of actually doing anything in the NFL. On top of all this, Bryce was expected to be the savior of the Panthers franchise, and the hype surrounding him was massive. I'm a former data analyst, and I remember going to the Panthers facility for a presentation that I got a chance to speak with some of the members on the analytics staff. And from what I heard, Bryce was just dicing everyone up in practice, and it seemed like he was a lock to win the Rookie of the Year award. So with Bryce looking so good in and out of the organization, what went wrong? Well, for starters, the NFL is just an entirely different game. It requires a lot more than just a quarterback, like quality receivers, defense, and most importantly, subscribing to Gridiron. And owner David Tepper learned this harshly, as to this point, he believed that Bryce would be able to fix everything and he didn't need to spend any money elsewhere.
How you can use the different players in the field, how you might not have to have as many elite receivers because he's the point guard, right?
With this mindset, the roster he helped general manager Scott Fitterer build around Bryce would be considered a war crime in at least 23 countries. Suddenly, the kid who won at every level could no longer win. With horrible protection and receivers that flat out just couldn't get open, Bryce fell apart and looked flat out terrible. The NFL game was just too quick for a quarterback whose biggest strength was his processing speed. He was getting hit before he could even finish making his first read of the defense. However, he still did show flashes of the force he was at Alabama, but it wasn't enough. Tepper, being incredibly impatient, fired head coach Frank Reich midway through the season, and Bryce now had to deal with a coaching change.
Look, things are constantly evolving, and they'll continue to evolve. And, trying to make things better is what you always try to do.
This urgency by David Tepper caused everyone in the building to feel it, and the hopes and dreams of the organization fell on the shoulders of some 21-year-old kid from Alabama. This entire time though, Bryce never complained, never put anyone down. He was just focused on himself and getting better. But the problem is that he never really had anyone around him to help him get better. The Panthers, and more importantly Tepper, hired a slew of coaches who had a ton of experience in the NFL to help Bryce, and more importantly, to bring results now.
Well, that's staff?
Oh yeah, it's a dream team. It's a dream team.
When I saw that staff,
Yeah.
I was like,
I said the same thing before I got hired. It's a job I wanted. So
Tepper to this point had never had a winning season or even came close to the playoffs. However, with this mix of coaches he hired, it resulted in a clash of a bunch of different opinions that nobody could agree on anything. The failing Panthers finished 2-15, and Bryce had historically one of the worst rookie seasons of all time. Bryce finished with 2,877 passing yards, 11 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions, completing just 59.8% of his passes. Everything that Bryce did so incredibly well at Alabama, he just wasn't able to transfer over to the NFL level. And from the outside, it seemed like Bryce was just another name on the list of failed Alabama and first overall quarterbacks. To make matters worse, fellow draft class member and childhood friend CJ Stroud had led his Houston Texans to the playoffs and even won a playoff game. After the season was over, it was clear that the Panthers made the incorrect quarterback decision. Bryce's confidence that he had carried with him throughout his entire life was being tested for the first time. Suddenly, his preparation wasn't bringing him the results he's used to. His footwork was incredibly antsy, as the speed in which the league plays at seemed to completely overwhelm him. The same quarterback who seemed unbreakable. And the 2024 NFL season seemed like it would be more of the same for the Carolina Panthers. Another desperate move by Tepper to bring results now. This time, it's Buccaneers offensive coordinator Dave Canales to be the next scapegoat. Head coach. Canales previously revived the careers of Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield, turning what seemed like failed quarterbacks into quality veterans. And for this upcoming season, Dave would have that same mission. Fix Bryce Young. So he and new general manager Dan Morgan went shopping and secured the interior of the offensive line by signing Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis, which is essential in protecting shorter quarterbacks. It's the same strategy that the Saints used to protect future Hall of Famer Drew Brees. Then in the first round, the Panthers traded up for South Carolina wide receiver Xavier Legette to give Bryce another weapon to throw the ball to. Everything was looking up for the Panthers, and there was a ton of anticipation on how this season would play out. There was one problem though. Bryce still had trauma from last year. He threw an interception on his first pass of the season, and once again, Panthers fans were left wondering where things went wrong. They suffered a brutal 47-10 loss in the opener, and Bryce threw for a disastrous 13 for 30, no touchdowns and 2 interceptions. And next week wasn't any better. Against the Chargers in the home opener, Bryce threw for only 84 passing yards with the interception in a 3-26 loss. It was clear that Bryce no longer had the same confidence that he carried in high school and college. He was shaken and rattled. He constantly bailed the pocket to run prematurely because he no longer trusted his offensive line to give him good protection, despite the offensive line being upgraded. Eventually, head coach Dave Canales saw how antsy and scared Bryce was, and he did something no one saw coming. He benched him.
Ultimately, this comes on me, and my number one responsibility is to help the Panthers win. And so this move, I believe, puts us in the best chance to do that.
This news came at the shock of everyone, including Bryce. But it didn't rattle him like many would think. Instead, he was focused on what he could control, just like he had done in the past. His teammates still saw that he was the same guy, regardless if he was a starting quarterback or not. Veteran Andy Dalton became the new starting quarterback for the Panthers, and it was clear that Bryce had won over the locker room, as Dalton said.
Bryce and I's friendship goes beyond just who's the one out there, and it's continued that way.
Dalton would end up winning his season debut in Las Vegas, and the Panthers' offense suddenly looked explosive again. But then, after 4 consecutive losses, Bryce sent hitmen. Andy Dalton got into a car accident, and Bryce would get another chance to start versus the Denver Broncos, the same franchise that had already delivered one killing blow to the Panthers in the past, and they were looking to deliver another one. Except, this game was different. Different than what we had seen from Bryce in the past. The benching had slowed the game down for him. He was able to see things from a different angle, and he made plenty of tough throws the entire game. Carolina lost, but Bryce looked like a different quarterback on the outside. But behind closed doors, Bryce was still himself, constantly preparing, only focusing on what he could control. His stat line wasn't anything that jumps out. 224 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. But he maneuvered the game a lot calmer than he had in the past. The next 2 weeks, Bryce helped the Panthers get back-to-back wins for the first time in 2 years against the Saints and Giants respectively. In those 2 games, Bryce finished with 297 yards and 2 touchdowns. Those stats aren't anything jaw-dropping, I know, but something was more important. Young continued to showcase calm and collected play. Carolina had one of the best offensive lines in the league, and with each play, Bryce was able to shake the memories of last season to trust them more. He was now standing in the pocket with confidence and delivering, just like he did at Bama and modern day. But the good times looked like they were about to come to an end, as the Panthers now had a date with the 9-1 Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs were 11-point favorites heading into this game, and the whole world saw an absolute obliteration of Carolina incoming, except Bryce had other plans. He went toe-to-toe with the defending champions and Patrick Mahomes. The moment wasn't big for him at all, as once again he trusted his preparation, which gave him the confidence to go out and perform. With this confidence, Bryce was able to keep the game tight and have a final opportunity to tie the game down 8 points late. And of course, using his reignited internal confidence in himself, he did just that. Had the Carolina defense managed to get a final stop, Bryce would have had the biggest upset in the NFL in probably the last few years. Carolina would lose 30-27, and Young threw for 263 yards and a touchdown. Finally, there were signs of hope in Charlotte. Bryce was showing flashes of the same quarterback he was at Alabama, knowing how to keep his head clear in the biggest of moments. His performance created a ton of buzz in the NFL world, and even Patrick Mahomes, who went on to say,
"Yeah, no, I thought he played his tail off, man. He throws a really good football. It's been cool to see him bounce back these last few weeks and play some great football because I know he has it. I've seen it for a long time, and he gave us a scare today, man, because he played his tail off."
The following week, against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Dave Canales had the opportunity to not only get revenge on his former team, but end Tampa's season. Bryce played incredible once again, throwing for 298 yards and a touchdown. But once again, Carolina would fall just short, losing 26-23 in overtime. Young had shown the NFL world that the game against the Chiefs wasn't a fluke. He was starting to gain more and more confidence in his play in the NFL, as well as in Dave Canales' system. And now, he had a chance to prove it against arguably the greatest defense in football and the 10-2 Philadelphia Eagles. Not only did Bryce keep a weak Panthers team in the game versus one of the top teams in the conference, he had another chance to win the game, and from a similar spot, he faced back in the 2021 Iron Bowl with Alabama. And just like he did at Bama, Bryce flashed the potential and led the Panthers all the way down the field and would have had the game-winning touchdown had Xavier Legette not dropped the pass. The Eagles game showed that Bryce had gone up to speed with the NFL and that he's now operating with the same confidence that he had in the past. And all it took was time and being benched to slow the game down for him. He's always had the ability to play the quarterback position, but now he was finally starting to see his preparation pay off at the highest level and was playing with confidence. Young now had the entire NFL world buzzing and making really questionable noises.
Rip it, and look at how, oh.
Bryce finished the last 5 games with 1,049 passing yards, 6 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions, with one of those interceptions being a drop. While I know those numbers don't jump out, we have to take a look at all the missed yardage from Carolina having less than ideal weapons. Without all the drops and whatever this is, Bryce finishes those last 5 games with 1,449 passing yards, 9 touchdowns, and 1 interception. If he were to continue at a similar pace over the course of a full season, this is where his numbers would be. Bryce would end up with 4,927 passing yards, 31 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. How good is that? Well, let's compare those numbers to the last 10 MVPs, assuming Bryce would keep the same pace throughout the season. Bryce would be 4th in passing yards and 10th in touchdowns, while throwing the least amount of interceptions of anyone. You get my point. Even if you were to take 500 yards in either direction, it's not long till we see Bryce in the MVP or even the Offensive Player of the Year discussion, as those are easily top 10 quarterback worthy numbers. The scary truth about Bryce Young is that he's intrinsically motivated, and someone who gains confidence from the inside will outwork everyone. And this exact trait is what the greats are made of.
The book is called Relentless, and in the book it talks about the clutch gene. And it says that nobody truly has the gene. that if you look at all the people who we've given that to, the Michael Jordans, the Kobes, the Tom Bradys, in those moments, they're actually doing what they always do. They're just doing it at the most important moment of the game.
He got it from his dad, teaching him how to keep himself calm and being confident in his own ability through his preparation and putting in the work. It took some time to unlock this ability at the speed of the NFL level, but he's starting to show signs. This newfound ability allowed Bryce to become the second most aggressive quarterback in the entire league, which shows that he's shaken his disastrous rookie season and is playing with some swagger. His first 2 career wins were both off last-second drives, and he's continued to take some of the league's best teams to the absolute wire with subpar talent around him. Bryce can make any throw on the field with ridiculous anticipation from years of going the extra mile and putting in the work for himself and his teammates. If he continues to gain confidence as the Panthers start to get more pieces on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, there's no way we won't see Bryce Young break out in the near future. Now, whether Bryce has his breakout season with Carolina, I have no idea. Because as a lifelong fan of the Panthers,
let's see how David Tepper f***s it up.
And to all my fellow creators who were view chasing during Bryce's struggles, stay on that side, alright? Speaking of struggles, another player who was undersized and dealt with a ton of struggles, yet still made the NFL Hall of Fame, was Zach Thomas. You might want to hear his incredible story. We always say that teams lose games because they left Mahomes too much time. Well, give it a few years and we'll say that teams lose games because they left Young too much time.